Welcome, everybody. Martinis with Scott. Come join us. Come join us. We're going to jump right in. Martinis with Scott, episode 175 on October 21st here of 2001. I hope you're doing well. Hope you had a great week. Cheers. Drinking the Lafroig 10-year today. Welcome to whoever joined us. Feel free to say hi. So let's jump right into it. I have two topics today. This week was the passing of General Colin Powell. General Colin Powell, and everybody is saying very nice things about the general, properly so, on the news, on social media. His views on leadership, which is what our channel is about. You know, I had the privilege of meeting Colin Powell in Toronto. I forget how many years ago. It feels like 5, 6, 7 years ago. At a dinner, but I had an opportunity to, chat with him for a minute, one-on-one, and listen to his speech, which was about 45 minutes. You bring in these speakers, and they cost a lot of money. I don't know what we pay for him, but it feels like it could have been $100,000, $125,000, $150,000 for this speech. And beforehand, I had the opportunity in a cocktail reception to shake his hand and have a little chat. And, a really, really nice guy, clearly in command, self-confident. But I have to tell you, I was a little underwhelmed. It just seemed not strong in substance. Now, maybe, he'd already retired and gone on to his speaking career. And maybe he had an off night. I don't know. That was my personal experience. I hear everybody else say that they were very, very impressed with him when they met him. And so maybe that's the case. But for me, I was a little bit underwhelmed. And then his speech was, again, sort of lacking in substance. And I was sitting with somebody else at the head table, and they had suggested to me that 2 weeks ago, they saw him in Texas, I think it was somewhere, and it was the exact same speech. So you're paying, the speaker for a canned 100, 150 grand for an hour. I mean, you get him for the whole night because he eats dinner and hangs out and that, but you pay him all this money for an hour speech or less, and you're getting just a canned presentation that isn't tailored at all to the audience. So that's a bit disappointing. I suppose that's the nature of that business. But that's just my personal experience. And I do want to say, I thought he was a really nice guy and clearly in command. And so let's just give him the benefit of the doubt and say it was an off night. I saw a quote today from him on Instagram. Somebody posted it. Leadership is solving problems. The day soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. They have either lost confidence that you can help, or they have concluded that you don't care. Either case is a failure of leadership. That's a good quote. I like that quote. I think it speaks a lot about leadership. Of course, leadership is much more than that. It's much more than that, but that's certainly one sign I have found in turning around businesses and turning around organizations, that if the employees don't talk to you, that is a failure in leadership. You're not solving their problems, and it can be because they don't trust you. They don't think that you care, but it could also be that they're intimidated. So there's another part to this. And like usually on Instagram memes, it's like, it sounds good when you read it, but the more you think about it, the more it just starts to fall apart. Often in business and in troubled organizations, the employees don't talk to leadership because they don't want to be whacked. They don't want to be slapped over the head. They're nervous about it. They don't trust you in that sense. Not that you don't care, but the culture that has been created is one that encourages intimidation and negative thinking, and you can't turn around a business until you change culture for that reason. So anyways, I just thought I'd read you that quote. One thing Colin Powell is or was famous for in leadership is his memoir, which contained 13 rules for leadership. So because we're a leadership channel, we will cover those 13 rules right now in honor of the general. Number one, It ain't as bad as you think. It will look better in the morning. Hey, everybody that joined us live, thank you. Right now, we're just talking about Colin Powell going through his rules for leadership. Later, we're going to talk about inflation and how that impacts your business. Number one, it ain't as bad as you think. It looks better in the morning. Leaving the office at night with a winning attitude affects more than you alone. It also conveys attitude to your followers. You know, the Martinis with Scott channel is a show, as I say, is a show about winning momentum in life and in business. And here, right off the bat, the general is saying you need a winning attitude, no matter how bad your day was. I've described this to people that I work with as recently as last week. This particular concept that turning around a business is an exercise in taking two steps. Well, you've heard the expression two steps forward, one step back. Well, I think in business turnarounds, you're two step forward, punch in the face, stagger back a step and a half, and then start again. That's always what it's like. You need to focus on positivity. And tomorrow's a new day. Tomorrow's a new day. And it's not just that tomorrow's a new day and facts change, but your attitude about it. Because if bad stuff starts happening in a turnaround, in a business, in any organization, if bad stuff starts happening and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you've been working since 6, you've been working since 7, your capacity to deal with the trouble is diminished, and your ability to stay positive and have a good attitude is diminished. You go home, you have a drink, you go to sleep. I'm not promoting the drink, but cheers again. You have a sleep, get up in the morning, you've got a different perspective on this, and you're able to deal with the problem for the day. And you'll find that a lot of the 13 rules here that the general is proposing for leadership, a number of them fall into two categories. At least half the list you could describe as positivity, which is a mainstay in the Martinis with Scott content, and being humble, which is another mainstay of my content. This one, of course, is positivity. Wait till tomorrow. You're going to wake up with a more positive attitude and you're able to deal with problems. Number 2, get mad and then get over it. Everyone gets mad. It's a natural and healthy emotion. My experience is that staying mad isn't useful. Again, this is from Colin Powell. I don't know about this one. I'll tell you, I don't really get mad at people making mistakes because I encourage them to take ownership of what their role is in the organization. You can't get mad at that. You can get mad if they do it twice, okay? But mostly what I get mad at is a lack of accountability, violating our known values. And if I do get mad at that, do I really want to get over it? Or do I want to make changes and implement systems to make sure that doesn't happen anymore? I understand the point. The point is that if you come from a space of anxiety, chaos, anger, you can't make good decisions. You can't be practical and sit down and execute. I understand that. It just doesn't work for me in terms of a messaging. His rule number 3, avoid having your ego so close to your position that when your position falls, your ego goes with it. Accept your position was faulty, not your ego. So to me, I like this one a lot. I always say, remind yourself that your position, the position you took on something, is at a point in time and is based on your prejudices. And you could, a hack to this is to always remind yourself that when you make a decision, say to yourself out loud, just say it. I could be wrong. I'm going to do this, but I could be wrong, right? Because you don't have certainty. You're interpreting facts. We talk about cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias on this channel all the time. You're interpreting facts to support the decision you already made. You might be wrong, and you need to be humble enough and understand how your brain works that you can say to yourself, I'm going to do this, but I might be wrong. Okay, so that's a good one. It can be done. Have a positive and enthusiastic approach to every task. Don't surround yourself with instant skeptics. This whole show, this entire content of Martinis with Scott is about positivity. I put a formula about positivity on Instagram the other day that was positive equals reality plus self-confidence plus hard work. What does that mean? The reality. Positive. I also put positivity does not equal delusion. Okay. It's not about thinking everything's rosy. It's not about thinking there's no problems. It's about recognizing the problems head on as accurately as you possibly can, but then believing in your ability to work through anything and then working your ass off to get that done. There's my formula for positivity: reality, self confidence, hard work. And again, as I said, a number of General Powell's recommendations for leadership here fall into the category of positivity. Be careful what you choose; you may get it. You'll have to live with your choices. Some bad choices can be corrected. Some you'll be stuck with. Again, to me, this is about humility, but I hate this piece of advice for leadership. I want you to think about in your business, in your life, you got to make a decision. We live in an and world. We don't live in an or world. Do everything, test things out, try it. Don't get hung up. It doesn't matter whether you made the right decision or wrong decisions. It matters that you try things, test them. If they're working, do more of it. If they're not working, stop. It's as simple as that. Don't be emotionally attached to your decisions. There is no wrong decision. You're always in everything trying things out. Don't let adverse facts stand in the way of a good decision. General Powell says superior leadership is often a matter of superb instinct. When faced with a tough decision, use the time available to gather information that will inform your instinct. I've said to you before in this channel, welcome those joining us live here. I've said before on the channel, make sure the choice is yours. Wait, I'm reading from the wrong spot. I've said leadership is about making choices based on incomplete information. I've promoted, I believe this came from Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio, he's got the 70% rule, which is try to get yourself to a position where you think, I don't have 100% of the information, but I've got more than 50%. I've got 70% available information. Make a decision based on that. Don't wait for 80%. Okay. A lack of speed kills in business when you're trying to implement change. You have to be able to make decisions with partial information. How much partial information? Ray Dalio suggests 70%. And I like that a lot. And if you're trying to change culture, if you're trying to turn around a business, that's always true. You need to make decisions quickly. You can't make, next rule from Colin Powell, you can't make someone else's choices. You should you should not let someone else make yours. I promote teamwork all the time. The new company that we have in Quebec, which I explained to you 2 weeks ago now, I think on the last show, we said that our values in this order are teamwork, integrity, meaning openness and honesty, perfect deliveries, perfect quality. That's what we're striving for. You have to, I think, as a leader, particularly when you're trying to change culture and you're trying to get buy-in, you're trying to get empowerment through to your employees, you have to let them make decisions and you have to go along with it, even if you don't think it's right. You need to do that because you need to train your people and they need to go through that learning curve. So I'm not really on side with this. Again, I understand his point, I think, which is don't get, as a leader, you can't be pushed into things that you don't agree with. But sometimes I'm always accused of this. Sometimes you just got to let people have the rope to go hang themselves and to try to learn from that experience. My view on that particular situation: check small things. Leaders have to have a feel for the small things, a feel for what is going on at the depths of the organization where small things reside. So true. So true. The success is an accumulation of details. How do you do that as a leader? You set up KPIs, key performance indicators, right? You try to measure. If you can't measure, you can't lead. That's just a fact. You set up KPIs, and then when things are not meeting the way you expect them, you need to dig down. You need to find out why, and that's going to tell you what's going on in the details of your organization. Next rule from Colin Powell: share credit. People need recognition, and a sense of worth as much as they need food and water. 100% true. Spread recognition. I like to just go out of my way and don't save it for performance appraisals. Go out of your way when someone does something you like, tell them that. When somebody does something you don't like, you don't necessarily have to hit them over the head with that every day. Rather, work with positivity as reinforcement, and you're going to see behavioral change pretty quickly and effectively on that. To do that, what do you need to do? You need to check your ego. Okay, this is not about you. If you're a leader, it's not about you. You're already good. That's how you got to be the leader. You need to make your people good. And you do that by giving them credit. And you do that again by having some humility on your side. Next, where are we on time? Well, we're doing well. Next lesson here from Colin Powell: remain calm and be kind. Few people make sound and sustainable decisions in an atmosphere of chaos. So true. So true. But you have to make the decision even if you're chaos, right? Turnarounds, troubled companies, troubled organizations, trouble in your life. It's all about chaos. It's all about chaos. Yet you have to make that decision still. So how do you do that? That's really what this channel is all about. I've given you a number of things and strategies. One of them, for example, is to limit the amount of time that you're working on the trouble, that you're working on the chaos. I've suggested, nobody can go through 12 hours a day of just running around from fire to fire to fire and not pushing their business forward. You're not going to fix the problem. You're going to burn yourself out. You're going to turn negative. You're not going to keep your positivity. I see it all the time. So one thing you can do is pick a time of day where you're effective and crank through it. Crank through it in a limited amount of time, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever your capacity is. And the rest of your workday, work on things that are positive, that you enjoy, and that move your business forward. Have a vision and be demanding. Followers need to know where their leaders are taking them and for what purpose. Good leaders set vision, missions, and goals. Of course, don't have much to say on that, but they also set values. And I think, what are you holding people accountable to? It's not the mission, it's not the goal. You're holding them accountable to the values, which may include meeting that mission, but values are what people respond to. That's what, and you see this in modern workforces all the time. It's more and more and more about values and what we stand for. That should not be left out of the discussion of what leaders are providing and what they're leading on. Don't take counsel of your fears. Do not take counsel of your fears or your naysayers, those who risk doing that. Those who do risk wasting their time and energy. I've given you on this show, this content, a bunch of strategies for fighting negativity. It's probably the most important thing. It's the reason I've told you, it's the reason you need to focus on positivity, because positivity in and of itself is not the answer. It's the counterbalance. It is the antidote to negativity, and negativity is what's going to kill you. That's what generates the fear. So I 100% agree with that point. And again, it's not so much about positivity, it's about not having negativity. And lastly, on General Powell's 13 rules for leadership: perpetual optimism is a force multiplier. If you believe the likelihood of success, your followers will too. Yet another example on his 13, another point on his 13 items for leadership here that really is just a reiteration of positivity. So you'll see, I haven't gone through do the count, but 4 or 5 of them are about positivity. 4 or 5 out of the 13 are about positivity. Another 2 or 3 are about humility. If that doesn't resonate with you, then you're missing out on something. So I wanted to do that in honor of Colin Powell and his career and influence on the world and on leadership. Let's move on. Let's talk about inflation. Inflation. All you hear these days, if you get on the news, is that we have a real problem with inflation, that it's creeping up. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean to business owners? Cheers again, by the way. So recent news articles in the US, inflation is at 5.4%. Canada, I heard the other day, 4.4%. And for context, forever, inflation has been popping around at 1% to 2% for a long, long time. I haven't gone back and researched that number, but that's what I think it is. And by the way, when I talk to you about inflation, I'm talking to you from the context of a business person who pays attention to some finance items and investing and just generally how the world works and politics. I'm not an economist. So this is not going to be an economics lesson. It may be technically offside in some cases, but I think it's a good way to think about this inflation and how, as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, this issue may or may not impact your life and your business. So Currently in the US, as I said, I read 5.4%, Canada 4.4%. Now, if you go back, let's go back to, because those of you that listen are too young to know this, let's go back to the late 1970s. Yes, the late 1970s, 50 years ago, off the top of my head, during the end of the Jimmy Carter administration. Many in the US are comparing Joe Biden and the administration to the Carter administration. I don't know if that's true or not true. I'm not here to do the politics on that, but many are comparing it. And at the end of the Carter years, in the late 1970s, inflation was 14.85%. So in the US right now, we're 5.4%. In the end of the Carter years in the 1970s, it was 14.85%. And mortgage rates, so the interest rate that you would pay on your mortgage in the early 80s, because I'm going to talk to you in a little bit, I'm going to explain to you how raising interest is one way that they try to bust inflation if they think inflation needs to be busted. Is one way is to raise interest rates. And the interest rates on your mortgage in 1981 in the US, yes, in the US, not in some third world country, in the US, reached a high of 16.65%. I talked to somebody outside my door here today, small businessman, new mortgage. His got a new mortgage a few months ago. His interest rate is around 2%, I think. He said, I think it might be a little bit higher than that, but he said 2%, doesn't matter. Early 1980s, 16.65%. If you look up, do a little research, which I did this morning, just quickly, the average mortgage debt in the US nationwide, the average mortgage is $200,000. Obviously, you have a bigger house, you got a bigger mortgage. But on average, you're $200, and the monthly payment on that, on average, is $1,100. So every month, the average person with a mortgage in the U.S. is paying $1,100 on their per month on their 200,000. I think it was $208,000 mortgage. Now that $1,100 that you pay every month is what's called a blended payment, and includes part interest and part principal. A lot of it is interest. Some of it is principal. By my math, based on current interest rates, I just backed into the idea that maybe $500 out of the $1,100 is principal. Let's just use that for a round number. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. Now, what would that $200,000 mortgage payment be, roughly speaking, at 16.65% interest? Well, the interest alone would be $2,775 per month. And if you put on that same $500 of principal that we're assuming, you end up with a $3,300 payment instead of an $1,100 payment. So you have an extra, what is that, $2,200 a month to the average family budget just to pay your mortgage. Okay, just to pay the interest and principal on your $200,000 mortgage. Do you think the average family in the U.S. can afford that? Or do you think there will be a slew of bankruptcies and foreclosures because of defaults on the mortgages? So that's kind of just an example back from the 1980s, and where the context, let's say, of inflation. Now, if you listen to the news today, cheers again, by the way. If you listen in the news today, you're going to see that inflation this is the political news. What you're going to see from the right is that inflation is terrible. It's a hidden tax. It's a hidden tax on people, right? You're also going to see that inflation means, what is inflation? It means the value of your currency is declining. It's wiping out the value in the US dollar. It's wiping out the value in the Canadian dollar. From the left, what you're going to find is, in the news there, is that inflation is not a problem. This is all temporary. It's due to COVID, and it's going to sort itself out. All right. So there's the news. It's a hidden tax. It's terrible. It's wiping out the value of our currency. It's terrible. And then the other side is, you're all just making this up. It's just because of COVID and supply chains and everything's going to sort itself out, and then inflation's not going to be a problem. So how should you think about this, and how will it impact your business? Well, the first thing, let's talk about, what is inflation? How is it calculated? Okay, let's say that you paid $500,000. I'm just making up numbers. You bought a house a while ago, and you paid $500,000 for that house, and now that house is worth $1 million. You think that's crazy? Come to my community. Come to my community. Properties are doubling in a year. Okay, so $500,000, your house is now worth $1 million. That is 100% inflation. Okay, now that's not a per annum unless you bought the house a year ago. If it was 2 years ago, it would be a lower number, 50%, or maybe a little less because there's a compounding impact on that. 3 years ago, 33%, a little less because there's a compounding impact on that. But the fact of the matter is there's gross inflation over whatever period of time. If it was exactly 1 year ago, that's 100% inflation. It went from 500,000 to $1 million. Okay. So how do they, when the news reports inflation to you, when the government talks about inflation, what is that? Well, they use what's called the consumer price index for the most part. And you need to know that there's a bunch of different ways that people calculate inflation, because the first question is like, on what? On what are we calculating inflation? Is it on the house, right? Or should it include food? If you're paying more for your broccoli than you were last month or last year, should that be included? What about your candy bars? What about your energy, the gas for your car, the electricity for your home, the natural gas for your home? What goes into that? And what they do, depending on the jurisdiction you're in, depending on who's calculating the numbers, is they do this, take a basket of goods. They say, wow, we think this should be there and this should be in there. And this just creates this representative sample of basically what it costs you as a normal human to live. And they measure the prices on that on average. And they adjust for things like location and seasonality and that sort of stuff. And so they calculate based on that. And then what they do to make things way more complicated is, if there's a public policy, let's say a public policy is to go green and to purposely tax and to carbon and to purposely drive up the price of energy so that you use less gasoline and you turn to more green energy. Should that policy, which is driving up the price of your energy costs in traditional carbon-based energies, should that be included in your CPI, in your consumer price index? And then some government official is going to say, wow, let's exclude that because that's kind of artificial. That's us causing that. Let's exclude that. So then you get CPIs that exclude things like housing, like energy, like food, like all the stuff that you spend all your money on. It doesn't even include it in the basket, right? And so here's the point. The point is, inflation is simply price raises on a basket of goods, whatever is in that calculation. The calculation is manipulated. The calculation is different, and you shouldn't trust it. It doesn't matter if your inflation is 4% or 5% or 6%. There's an argument that inflation is actually after tax, so you need to gross up, and really 4% is 10%, whatever, okay? The point is, follow the trend. Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? Is it getting better? And clearly, we're in a position that it is getting worse right now, okay? So that's what inflation is. That's how it's calculated. Don't believe any stats coming out of the government in any jurisdiction, obviously, these days. But you can look at the trends and you can see that it's a problem. All right, concept 2, second thing I want to talk to you about. Why does it occur? And you've heard from the news. You've heard, if you're in the business world, if you've ever taken a business course, an economics course, it's the devaluation of our currency, right? It's the devaluation of our currency that causes inflation. So why did they say that? Well, let's go back to our house example. You bought a house for $500,000, and next year that house is worth $1 million. Okay, that's inflation on that specific asset. Did the house change? Right? Let's say you didn't do any renovations. Let's say you did nothing to it. It's the exact same asset. The house hasn't changed. So what changed? Well, this is a relative valuation. You got a house and you got dollars that you paid for it. So if the house didn't change, then the dollars changed, which means the dollars are worth less, right? Which doesn't really help you. That's not really why the price of the house went up in reality. And maybe it is in economics, but I want you to think about business and I want you to think about your life. And the answer is, prices go up and down for one reason, and one reason only, which is supply and demand. Okay. So if you have more demand and supply stays equal, prices go up. If you have less supply and demand stays equal, prices go down, right? So that's what is causing everything. I want you to think that way, supply and demand. So when the supply is disrupted or when supply is reduced, there is scarcity of that commodity that you're trying to buy or that product that you're trying to buy, and prices go up. So, what disrupts supply? What reduces the amount of supply? Well, does any of this sound familiar to you in the last year? How about businesses being shut down? Businesses being shut down create scarcity and it disrupts supply. How about no labor? Workers aren't going to work, they're being paid to stay home. You got vaccine mandates, which are causing people to, be thrown out of their jobs. Okay, depending again on what jurisdiction you're in. And I'm not passing judgment on any of those policies in the situation you're in, but you have to admit, no matter what side of the political aisle you are on, all of these things limit the amount of supply in the marketplace for whatever product or basket of goods that we're talking about. So supply is disrupted by those things. Now, when demand, as I said, is increased, it also creates scarcity. Demand is more demand for the product. Okay, what might cause demand to increase? Does any of this sound familiar? In the last year, credit. That's the big one. Okay, credit is giving money to people to spend on stuff. It increases demand. If you're able to borrow money cheaply from the banks, if you're able to borrow money from credit cards relatively cheaply, if you get, when they talk about the Feds printing money, what does that mean? What it means is they provide more money to the system, to financial institutions, to corporations, and they in turn pay their people, buy more stuff, and it flows through theoretically through the whole economy, and everybody has some more money to spend because they're able to borrow. So credit is a big thing, okay, that increases demand. How about social programs? If you have people staying home and you're giving them a bunch of money to stay home during a global pandemic, I'm not judging the policy. I'm just pointing out the obvious that if people can't spend and then they can't work, that reduces supply, and they sit home and the government gives them a bunch of money, that increases demand because they can sit there and order stuff on Amazon and do whatever they want with that money. Now there's a bunch of more money into the system that increases demand. You want to talk about social programs. What will the impact be of, say, canceling student debt in the US with the $3 trillion social program? Not saying it's a bad idea. In fact, dealing with student debt may be a terrific idea just based on the fact that student debt has been a fraud from day one in the US. But what will that do? That will mean that the people that have that student debt, which I think is the second largest category of personal debt in the US behind mortgages, what will that do? It will mean that the people that have that debt don't have to pay that debt anymore, and therefore they will have some more money. And correct, bingo, that will increase demand yet again. So, in the past year or two, during the global pandemic, we've got supply disruptions, reducing supply. We got lots of free money, increasing demand. Is it any wonder that we have price increases, inflation, when it's the supply demand solely that drives price increases and inflation? Okay, so is this temporary? That's the last piece of the politics. Is it temporary? Well, yes and no. If the politicians let the market sort it out, right? If they stop with the social programs, if they let people go back to work, and it all sorts itself out, then probably the inflation will not continue. It will gradually die down over months and it'll sort itself out. Will prices go back down? No, energy prices might, but for the most part, prices don't go back unless it's commodity like energy or broccoli or whatever. But wages are, you can't start paying people less, so that's not going to happen. Anyways, prices won't really go back down except on those visible, highly sensitive commodities. But for the most part, inflation could die off if the market were allowed to rebalance that demand and supply. But if the people in charge in the various countries don't let the market sort it out, if they keep giving free money away, if they keep regulating businesses like the energy business out of existence, or pipelines and killing coal and all that sort of stuff, Then clearly not. It's not temporary at all. This will continue as long as government policies that manipulate supply and demand continues. That's what's going to happen. Okay. Now, I talked before about this, but the third point I wanted to raise: does inflation mean that currency is devalued? I gave you the example of the house, and the answer is yes. It does mean, by definition, that the value of the currency is devalued. If your house goes from 500,000 to a million, the house didn't change. So the only other possibility is the money changed and it got worse. But I don't think that's a helpful analysis for business owners or those that want to just think about, non-economists that just want to think about how this is working. If you think about supply and demand, you can easily predict what your government is doing and what their policies are, what their proposed policies are, and how they will impact inflation, right? If the Democrats in the US pass their several trillion-dollar spending bill, what will that do? Will that increase demand? Of course it will. Of course it will. Will it help balance demand and supply? Maybe there'll be some supply benefit, right, to that spending bill. Make your own judgment. I'm not trying to comment on the spending package one way or the other. I'm just saying that if you have this frame of reference, if you view it through this filter, you can make your own judgment pretty easily, because it's just such an esoteric thing to say, oh, my currency is not worth what it was yesterday. Like, what does that even mean to you, practically speaking? Think about supply and demand. Okay, is inflation bad? Why should we care? Why should we care about this? After all, the economy that you live in, that you work in, that allows you to do everything that you do to eat and support your family, the economy is just a great big consumer confidence machine, right? All of the other math behind it doesn't really matter. What matters is, are consumers confident enough to go out and invest, to take a vacation, to buy the consumer product? Are businesses confident enough to invest in their manufacturing machinery, capital expenditures, right? And if they are, then the economy grows and everything's great. And if the consumers and the businesses are not confident enough, then what happens? Well, then it declines, right? The whole economy falls apart. And when things start to get bad, then everybody goes, oh boy, the economy's turning bad. And then they become less confident and you just head into a recession, depression. So how do you feel? How do you feel about it as a homeowner, as a consumer, if you bought a house last year for 500,000 and this year it's worth $1 million? Well, you feel pretty damn good, right? You think you're an investing genius. You knocked it out of the park. Okay, that may not be true. That's just inflation playing tricks on your emotional state, but that's a healthy thing, right? That's a healthy thing. But what are the problems with inflation? So we have to admit that there is theoretically, mathematically, you shouldn't have any inflation, but at an emotional consumer confidence level, it's good to have a little bit of inflation. It's good to have 2% like we've had for a long time, okay? But is it good to have 5%? Where do the problems kick in? Well, what happens if your inflation is too high? One issue, if you're running a business, is that you have to pay more for your input, right? We have a friend of the channel who buys socks and then brands them and resells the socks. Well, if the cost of his socks go up, doesn't the price to the consumer have to go up as well? I mean, it is the price of consumer that is the definition of inflation, but it flows through the chain. So if your input costs in your business are going up and your wages are going up, right? We're just giving people raises, signing bonuses, and stay bonuses, and referral fee bonuses to fight in this really scarce labor market as we fight against the government who pays people to stay home. If your cost of labor goes up, don't you have to pass that on to the consumer? Well, yes, you do. But as a business owner, there's a time lag. Okay, there's a time lag between when you start incurring these costs, potentially. There's a time lag between when you start incurring these costs and when you're able to pass them on the consumer. There's a risk that you can't pass on 100% of those costs to the consumer. Say your costs go up 10%. Can you just pass through 10% and maintain your margins? Can you pass through 8% and take a 2% hit on your margins, right? So you need, as a business owner, to stay on top of that. But this time lag, if I'm paying somebody $20 an hour and that person all of a sudden has to pay 300% more for the gas in their car, and their food costs are going up. When are they going to get a raise for me? It's never quick enough. It's just never quick enough for the and so inflation at a certain level hurts families. At the end of the day, you're not getting paid enough. You're not getting a pay raise quick enough to deal with the extra costs that you have. And so there's a downside to inflation. And because we know now that inflation, the real way that we ought to, practical way that we ought to think about this is a supply demand imbalance. Well, the fact that that exists speaks to underlying problems in the economy. Remember that inflation is a symptom. It's a symptom of an imbalance, the way I think about it, between supply and demand. And if that imbalance isn't fixed, inflation can evolve. It can grow into a vicious cycle. What do I mean? Prices go up. You got to pay more for gas. You got to pay more for food. You got to pay more for housing. Now you need a raise. So you get a raise from your employer because you need that. And you can't work at this job. You have to go to a different job, which is paying more money. And because the employer is now paying you more, they have to charge more, which is you that's buying that. So prices go up. So prices go up. Wages go up. Prices go up. Wages go up. Throughout the system, it turns into a vicious cycle. And eventually, because there's this massive supply, well, not massive, but potentially a massive supply demand imbalance, which is what we're seeing all over the world right now as I'm doing this show, eventually you run the risk, if inflation is high enough, of confidence in the economy falling apart. Remember, the economy is a confidence machine. And if that falls apart, you have trouble. And then you lack confidence. The confidence in your leadership falls apart. So you don't have any confidence in your economy. You don't have any confidence in your leadership. And if it gets bad enough, you have no confidence in your currency, which is a disaster. Okay. So you think I'm exaggerating? Venezuela in 2016, I'm going to give you some numbers as how bad this inflation can get. In 2016, they had 274% inflation. In 2016, 274% inflation compared to our 5%-ish inflation right now. Okay, things can get way worse. I'm not suggesting they are. I'm not suggesting the US or Canada is Venezuela. I'm telling you where this vicious cycle can go and has gone in very recent history in many places. 274% in 2016, 863% inflation in the year of 2017, 130,000% inflation of the year in 2018, and then just a mere 9,500% in 2019. 2018, 2019. 2018 was 130,000. 2019 was the 9,500% inflation. Okay, what does that do? Results in a total collapse of the economy. Results in the creation of alternative currencies, and ultimately, everything falls apart. The government then, what choice do they have but to seize your property rights? Right? Because what good is collecting taxes on currency that's unspendable, that's just useless? So what do? Well, you don't collect taxes in currency. You collect it in hard assets. What is hard assets? Hard assets is your land, it's your home, it's property rights, because that's the only way for the government to sustain itself. And so that's not, again, that's not just a political commentary on communists and the left government seizing property rights. It's a natural evolution of how bad things can get when confidence falls apart and inflation goes to these thousands of percent and a crazy number. Again, I'm not suggesting that's what's happening in the US or Canada, but it's important to have that context as to why inflation can be bad. So how do we fight inflation? How does governments fight inflation? Well, you need to do the opposite of what's going on now. You need to cool off demand, and you need to increase supply, because it's always just a balance of the supply demand. Okay, and so policies that do that. So what would be some policies? Just think of the opposite of what's been happening. So for example, on energy, you could allow some pipelines, and you could encourage domestic production. That would bring down the cost of energy. You've seen that in the U.S. You saw the U.S. being energy independent during the Trump administration, and not energy independent anymore, and prices quadruple. I think they've done at least that in the US, 400% inflation. You could reduce COVID support programs, right? You're sending out people checks, and you're making them stay home from work, which hurts supply. You're sending them out checks, which increases demand. If you were to reverse that, you would have a positive effect. Remember, I said if you think about this as supply and demand, you can start to predict which policies are going to are going to impact inflation and how you could allow businesses to be open rather than force them to be closed in COVID hotspots. You could get rid of vaccine mandates. I'm not saying you want to. I'm not saying that's a great idea. I'm not commenting on the policy, but clearly, if you have vaccine mandates wiping out police forces, first responders, large businesses, airlines, that's going to increase prices, right? You reverse that policy, it's going to put a stop to the inflation, and so et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'm not for those of you leaving me live stream in mid category here because you're pissed off at the vaccine conversation. I'm not promoting that. I'm just saying that you can easily see its impact on inflation, and you need to weigh what's more important to you. But if that doesn't happen, here's a big one because governments are likely not going to do what I just said. So what are they going to do? They're going to increase interest rates. That's what's going to happen because if you increase interest rates, the cost of credit becomes much higher. And if the cost of credit is much higher, then you borrow less. And if you borrow less, that reduces demand. Do you remember the Jimmy Carter story at the beginning with mortgages in the early 1980s in the US at 16.65%? That's how governments, without changing their policies, impact and get rid of inflation. And that's the risk. That's the risk. And central banks in both countries, in the US and Canada, have both announced indefinite interest rate hikes. They're not huge. I mean, interest rates are at below historic lows. They have been since 2008. It's been crazy how low interest rates are. So it cools off the economy to have a little bit of an interest rate increase. When they say it cools the economy, it reduces demand. That's what that means. And it reduces demand because you can't afford to borrow as much. And so it kind of flows through the system that way. But interest rates will be hiked. The question is, will it be as crazy as it was back in the 1970s? 1980s. So what does this mean for your business? We're a show about leadership and about business. What does it mean to you personally? A few things to think about. Your input prices are increasing, and you may not be able to pass those on to your consumer fast enough. Do you remember I've talked about on this show the formula for making more money that I'd like you to focus on in your business? It's, everybody talks about got to sell more. In order of priority, margin, right? Your selling price less your variable costs. Then your fixed overhead, reduce your costs, and then sell more. Okay. I want you to think in that order. Well, if your input prices are going up and you can't pass it on to your consumer, that is about margin, right? The most important thing that I've said to you that you need to focus on is margin, and inflation is going to hurt your margins unless you can pass it on, which you probably can't in whole or quick enough. Labor increases. That you may not, so that was on input costs, meaning your raw materials that you buy, and your labor is going to go up as well, right? Because you have a shortage in the labor market. You need to pay people more. People need to earn more money to pay for their gas and their food and their housing because of inflation. So your labor costs are going to go up, and it's the same point. And it's going to cut into your contribution margin. And you need to pass that on to consumers, but you're not going to be able to do that quickly enough. So just hunker down and beware that we may be entering a period of tightening margins, and that could impact your business, probably will impact your business. And think about how you're going to deal with that. Interest rates. Interest rates will go up. If you borrow from a bank, if you got sub debt, you've got a bunch of credit card debt, and those interest rates are variable, which most of them are. You got a home mortgage that's variable, which most of them are. The interest rate is going to go up. Is it going to go up a little bit and you'll be fine? Maybe. Is it going to go up a lot and you're not going to be fine? Well, that's a possibility too, depending on government policies with the social programs. In other words, how much worse the inflation becomes because of government policies. But, I'm really getting worried about interest rates, and it's impacting my decision making. I could pull the trigger on a line of credit in a particular business right now, and I'm wondering, do I want to lock into that? What happens if interest rates triple in the next year? Like, that's a plausible scenario. What happens if they go up 5 times? in the next year and a half. That's a plausible scenario. So I want you to think about that in your business. And if interest rates do go up and everybody's over levered, remember the Jimmy Carter scenario and the early 1980s where the interest rate was raised to break the inflation, the mortgages were 16.65%. What does that mean? It means bankruptcies. It means foreclosures. It means a lack of a loss of confidence in the overall system. And if you're a business owner, how does that impact your customers? And how does that impact your receivables, your ability to collect on the credit that you've extended? You need to think about that and what that means for your business. All right, that's it on inflation. Thank you for listening. We're 50 minutes in. This has been Martinis with Scott, episode 175 on YouTube. Maybe we'll get it out on some other platforms. I'm not sure what they're going to do with that. But again, thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye.